te sientas y yo te presento. Muy buenas tardes con todos. Es un placer.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here on this 8th Energy Week on behalf of the Latin American Energy Organization, the Ministry of Industry, Energy and Mining of Uruguay, the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, and the first investment forum of IRENA. We wish you all a good session. It's an honor for the organizing institutions of this important event to be together here in this city in Montevideo. We would like to express our deepest gratitude to our main sponsors, institutional support and media partners for their collaboration in organizing this Energy Week and the first investment forum for the energy transition of Latin America organized by IRENA. In this session we will be talking about critical minerals, and it will be moderated by our colleague from the IDB, Martin Walter, whom I have here to my left, and I'm honored to introduce him. He is a colleague with a long-standing trajectory. He's been working in natural resource and energy development at the Natural Resource and Energy Division at the IDB. This event focuses on a very important topic that we have analyzed for the last couple of days, which is one of the critical technologies, just like hydrogen, green hydrogen, which has been another topic that we have discussed so far. And these sessions aim at discussing and sharing those hot topics with the whole energy community. I would also like to invite you to follow this event on YouTube, which is being live streamed. And you can also visit our website. So please feel free to share your experiences through our social media. And Martin, now you have the floor to kick off today's session. Thank you very much for your attendance. And remember that we have live streaming on YouTube. Thank you very much. Martin, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. I am Martin Welder. I am a specialist at the IDB in mining issues. I am based in Buenos Aires, and it's a great pleasure for me and an honor to be here as part of this panel. First, because of the very distinguished panelists that we have on the stage, but also and above all because it's important to discuss this topic in this Energy Week, a topic that I consider to be fundamental, that has to do with the material conditions for the compliance of the climate goals, which are ambitious globally. Also energy transition policies, industrial decarbonization, which are ultimately based on what we are going to call critical minerals for the transitions, as Gaston was very clear about and he explained so clearly. Latin America and the Caribbean is rich as a region in natural resources. These resources are an intrinsic part of the industrial processes and the technologies that we need in order to achieve this energy transition. This has implications of different sorts. On the one hand, geopolitical implications. This is connected with the challenges that it means to have war in some countries of the region, changes in the industry structures connected to the technological transformations, digitalization and electrification processes that that will make us rethink our collaboration schemes internationally around these minerals. On the other hand, we have to be aware of the generation projects development, generation and production processes for these key materials and resources, and then the value chains for them. So these are some of the topics that we will discuss today on this panel. Before I introduce my colleagues here one by one, I would like to give the floor to Gaston Sirois. Gaston is an OLARE consultant for critical minerals for transitions. He's a friend of many years. And what I would like Gaston to do is to give us a brief presentation that allows us to set the tone, some basic definitions and some key data that we need to bear in mind, upon which we can just elaborate on the discussion with the rest of the panel. So Gaston, we will be listening to you very carefully.
Muchas gracias, Martín.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here with you sharing this panel. As Martin was just saying, he gave us a bit of the context, so let me just add a few words on what he said while we wait for the presentation to appear on the screen. I think that throughout this week we have discussed those transitions that need to happen and how those transitions towards cleaner and more sustainable energies and economies should be. And what's important about it? Well, I think that the fact that we have several transitions, but they all share something in common, which is that they will all require an amount of minerals and a number of minerals greater than conventional technologies. So regardless of the region where this transition is happening, regardless of the country, regardless of the context, what they all have in common is that these technologies will require a greater consumption of energy. And of course, this can be explained in numbers. If we take a 2020 report by the IDB, it was said that we need 3 billion tons. So that's 3 billion tons of minerals and metals to implement these technologies. The same thing goes if we take the volumes of production and refining. They could be up to 40 times the volumes that we were producing back in 2020. The case is lithium, according to an ARENA report of 2021. This shows us that The need for these minerals is growing, and it's going to remain more important as time goes by. So let's talk numbers. These are some of the numbers that we can get from these reports, the ones that I've just mentioned, on which we see, regardless of the scenario that we choose, be it an optimistic scenario, a moderate scenario, or perhaps a more pessimistic scenario. Maybe my colleagues here in the panel can delve into that, into this a little deeper. But all these minerals will have to multiply their production. And clearly, in the case of lithium and nickel, even though we see that values are different, still the starting point is different. It's not the same if you have productions of 100,000 tons than if you're starting with 3,000 or 30,000 tons. So imagine the impact that growth could have.
So the first concept that I wanted to share with you is a concept that I believe is quite widespread. It's not new. It's the critical minerals concept. In very few words, to explain what that means, we should mention some particular features. It is a critical mineral if it's critical for a particular region or sector. What does that mean? That each country will have their own list. We won't work with a general list. Some minerals will be found in most of them. But for example, for a country that might not require a certain mineral, or a country that might have an abundance of a certain mineral, or a country where their industry doesn't need it for development, it will change whether they will include it or not in their critical minerals list. That is important to understand the geopolitical aspects, which we will come back to. Why is it present or not in a list? It's not a technical decision, but rather strategic. So if there is such a definition of critical minerals, why is it that Latin America and the Caribbean cannot transform the need for critical minerals in a strategic mineral for our region? We do have them. So when there is a need, there is an opportunity. So I think this is a significant opportunity for our region. So we can start discussing and we can start talking about strategic minerals. Maybe we shouldn't call them critical minerals anymore, but rather strategic minerals for our region. So that's the first debate for us as a region. What should we do to discuss which we consider strategic minerals? So part of the work we've been doing together with OILADE is establishing those first pieces of criteria to define which we will consider as strategic minerals. We worked on 4 pillars. The reserves in Latin America, considering this initial list of critical minerals. The production in Latin America and Caribbean, how critical they are, and what do I mean by being critical? How many times do we include that mineral in all critical minerals lists? Why? The bigger the demand, the more opportunities we have to sell our supply. And then the market value. As we said before, if we have a market for a mineral that is worth $30 million, might not be as important for 20 or 200,000. So it will have a critical impact for those that need the mineral, and for the industry, the fact that the market value is 30 or 3,000 or 300,000 is critical. But if you're the party that needs to make the investment for development, we know that we are targeting a growing market reaching millions. Well, that's different. So that's the spirit, and that is the criteria that we used for those 4 pillars. At the same time, we tried to look at what's the final destination for those minerals. So we looked at the existing literature and created categories. So minerals like iron will be used in pretty much all industries or sectors. It was really difficult to choose one or two. But now if we think of lithium, well, that might be a more specific target or final destination. So we try to analyze what will it be used for, so we could sort them out in different categories. What's one of the main drivers for the minerals? And again, what we will discuss in this event is electromobility. If we look at how some of the minerals are used, we'll see that it's closely connected to stocking and electromobility. Bloomberg projects an exponential curve which starts accelerating as of 2024-2025. In mining, as it is in other extractive industries, it is important that decisions are made 4, 5, 10 years in advance. We cannot expect to have an increase in production unless you've had done several years before an adjustment on the regulatory framework, different efforts, provided different and very clear frameworks for exploration and production. So many efforts are required. So we must address them in a timely manner so we can get the levels of productions that is needed when it's needed. When we say that Latin America and the Caribbean's always been blessed with natural resources, and this is something that we've heard repeatedly when it comes to energy, wind, solar resources, hydroelectric power, but minerals are no exception. Gas is no exception, hydrocarbons are no exception. Here on the screen we can see, and we have sort of different colors or different shades of colors showing those countries that have higher concentrations of the different minerals. You can see different countries, and in some of them we have a wider range, but in general we can see the minerals are rather concentrated. In 4 or 5 countries that might concentrate 80% of a given mineral, and that might lead to some difficulties when the industry sectors want to get a hold of that production. So that's another factor to consider when planning and identifying different risks, opportunities, or proposals for the region. So if we consider those 4 criteria, and I'm sparing you of looking at the different calculations, we can look at that first top 10 mineral list. So minerals like rare earth elements are not ranked among the first, so we might not focus most of our efforts on those, but rather we should start maybe looking at some screening or regulation. Now these are minerals for which stock is proved, a lot of progress been made, copper, lithium, there are many for which we should do feasibility studies, environmental licenses, so the region has done some inroads in this regard, and these are some of the main minerals we should focus our efforts on. So to wrap up, these are my last 2 slides. This one shows the main concepts that we can use to group the challenges for our strategic minerals industry. And we can look at governance, environmental, social environmental, sustainability, technical and financial aspects. We want to develop proposals following those pillars. So to have a little mnemonic device to help our memory, we are proposing 5 pillars. These are just proposals, but I think that gives us a good chance to discuss whether this is valid or not. The first pillar is sustainability, social and environmental sustainability. I know there are no doubts, there are certain actions to take in terms of communication, dialogue, and so on. Different panels have addressed how important these topics are and should not just be addressed in the public environment, but also private, society at large, and just consider different stakeholders, how to put all of this into practice on the ground. So this is not just done in theory, but there is consensus and agreement as to how to move forward. The next one, we should speak about recycling, sustainability, and so on. Now, the second pillar is energy transition. When we speak about mining and the use of power or energy, we should come as close as possible to power shoring or renewable energies to have good infrastructure for development, and that means that wherever we have resources, we have to bring schools, hospitals, roads. We need to have an enabling ecosystem for development, and that comes hand in hand with the work of the private sector. Updating and governance and the state, we need to modernize the state. They should be able to have proper oversight, to have the necessary resources to implement good governance structures and the redistribution of royalties. And the final two should focus on economic recovery. How? By strengthening exploration and screening concepts, investment. And well, this is a good example that we should speak about mining in energy forums. We will not be able to have an energy transition if we do not do the necessary work in terms of energy mining. And this is the reality. The developed, sustainable world is very closely connected to mining. And as Martin mentioned before, value chains and productive operations. Martin mentioned it, I am mentioning it as well. I'm sure those that will come after me will do the same, because these are core aspects to our topic. And finally, before going back to Martin, applied technology in general. We believe that that mining should be carried out in a way where it will promote local development. We need to support research, we need to support polymetallic mining and all of the refinery efforts. So these are some concepts that we have heard repeatedly over the course of the week. Our matrix is one of or the cleanest in the world. Refinery will use large amounts of energy, so this is a good opportunity to have and ensure sustainable mining for a just energy transition. So if we consider that all minerals, that we will have a very significant carbon footprint in transportation, refining them, and then have other products, we need to add value where we have resources and clean energy available. So that is the last out of the 15 pillars that we are proposing. That is all for me for now, and we'll go back to the panel. Thank you, Aston. This is a good introduction for, well, people who have not much knowledge about mining. What we are speaking is about transforming natural resources into development in terms of policy, technology, projects, infrastructure, and so on. So I won't say myself. I will introduce our panelists, our very renowned panelists. Let me start introducing someone who's not here in person with us, but he's here in spirit, and he's here online. Ana Milena Vázquez. Ana has over 20 years experience in the mining sector in Colombia. She's the co-founder and vice president of Women in Mining in Colombia. She's been a consultant in the mining sector, and she's taken on leading positions in the private sector. We are so honored to have Ana with us today. We also have Ricardo Boni here with us. Ricardo is an economist. He's he joined IRENA in 2018 as the chief. I will call him chief. Trailings. He is the head of roadmaps at the global, national, regional level, and he's responsible for some very interesting publications that I'm sure he'll mention as well. To his right, we have Rafael Poveda. He's an international consultant. He's based in Santiago de Chile, working with ICLAC, and he's also authored very interesting studies about governance and critical minerals, lithium in particular. I don't just recommend you read those articles, but I will actually share them with you. And the same with the rest of the reports that we'll mention today.
Experiencia en el sector minero.
He has experience in the mining sector and governance issues, but he also knows really well the public sector, because he has been involved himself working for the public sector. So we really hope that he will be able to give us a bit of his views in that sense of governance. And we also have Mason Hamilton. I'm going to introduce him in English because he will be speaking in English.
Secretary General of the International Energy Forum for Strategy, Analysis and Engagement. The IEF is the world's largest organization of energy ministers with 71 member nations and counting. Me encanta tener al IEF porque nos va a permitir hacer esta vinculación.
I love having the IEF because it's going to allow us to have a clearer link between energy policies and mineral development policies. I see Ana Milena. I don't know if the rest of you can see her. I hope that now, Anna, you can join the scenario, the stage, sorry, with the rest of the panelists. But just to start the panel discussion, I would like to ask Ricardo a question. Ricardo, from Irena's perspective, can you shed some light on how to contextualize this conversation on critical minerals within the framework of the big climate policy goals and energy policies? What is the role of these minerals? Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. I think that this is a topic that we're all very passionate about.
Energética es una forma de traer
As we said,
desarrollo, como dijiste.
the energy transition is important to not just bring along the necessary changes, but also to talk about our common challenges regarding climate change. And here I am sitting just on like sideways because I had some issues with my back. I had some back issues, and well, I think that's exactly how we feel at the moment regarding this topic. When it comes to critical materials, because basically what I'm talking about is that we need to create a backbone. In this sense, we need to address how, based on that backbone, we can bring along the benefits for the region in the energy transition. And I feel that we are a bit ill for now, so I'd like to draw that analogy. In the same way that my back hurts, I think that our common back hurts, and based on that, I'd like to talk about the Veto by Irena, which basically comes with a very interesting message in the sense of the necessary effort to decarbonize towards that 1.5 degree goal. We need electrification with renewables. We also need bioenergy. We need hydrogen and a wide array of transformations regarding the different sectors in our economies, and that's very interesting. Just to give you some rough numbers, in terms of the demand, as you said, here we have numbers that add up to 33,000 gigawatts of renewables by 2050 and an electrification of 90% towards 2050 as well. In transportation, basically. So, what I would like to mention here is that what we are discussing here is a critical point, not for energy security. I don't think that's the biggest point, but it is for accelerating the transition. We need to carefully plan this out so that we don't have any market disruptions, so we don't come across any bottlenecks. There is an ARENA report, a geopolitical report by ARENA, and all of this is available at our website, so feel free to take a look if you will. And in that report, we made it clear that we understand that there is no reserves scarcity for minerals, but there is, as was mentioned before, a concentration in some countries that in the mid and long term may not be that big an issue, but it does pose a challenge when you think about the processing and the risks associated to that issue.
Creo que lo que más interesa
So I think that what is most interesting to us here is how to bring that development and equity discussion together with how we develop our value chains in the different countries of the region. So I think that that is a central issue that I would like to address.
y ahí empiezo a hablar un poco de geopolítica con el cuidado que
And so I want to talk a little bit about geopolitics, being careful enough, as I should, but what seems to be the background of all this is a bit of a commercial war. So what we are discussing is how the different markets in this energy transition will be re-establishing themselves in the sense of, okay, who owns the market for what product? And that is a context that you can see now. The game is being played, and it's played in the field, as we say. So basically we need to have a protectionist perspective, because on the one hand we're trying to give access to markets and resources, and at the same time what you also hear is that the region is becoming more and more protected to work through this reindustrialization process, and that's something that we need to carefully manage. I don't know how this is going to unfold, but we need to understand how to coordinate that process. Another important issue, and we can then talk about what's happening at the European Union, which is an example of this development and this reindustrialization process and how that could be implemented in other regions. Another issue that I find very interesting is, and that we need to be careful about in this discussion, is technological innovation in the sense of how that can have an impact on the demand. So we have some studies that will allow us to seek alternatives to some resources that are being used, and probably that's going to be very much determined by pricing. So we do have substitute products that could also have a very interesting impact in the long term in terms of how we can accelerate the energy transition. Innovation plays a key role in this sense. And that is also something that several countries in the region bear in mind, with the support of very important funds for research and development. And just to mention one last point, we have the issue of supply chains and how to develop a strategy that will be about adding value, truly, because to add value in a process like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should not export raw materials or products that are not that processed, but what it means is that you need to add value to the process with knowledge, with being competitive, and with technical capacity, because otherwise you're destroying value. I think that those are the preconditions that countries in the region need to truly have the capacity to bring along a benefit for their economies. And I think that that's another issue that we might as well address, and I find it very interesting. And well, that's it for now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ricardo. You can see that this is very straightforward, and it's not going to require a lot of work. No, I'm kidding. It's very complex, and I think that you've presented all the challenges really well. On the one hand, we have a very big market opportunity. At the bank, we estimate for Latin America and the Caribbean an opportunity of $50 billion a year by 2030, connected with the opportunities that arise from the energy transition, or energy transitions, as Gaston said very well in plural, for the mining sector around these critical minerals and strategic minerals for the region. And now I would like to give the floor to Mason, and I'm going to switch to English.
And fostering cross-sector dialogue is the role of the IEF. And recently, in collaboration with the Colorado School of Mines, you have published a very interesting report on outlook for critical minerals. You emphasize the need for greater investment and coordination, but also the overarching uncertainty around all these dialogues and decisions. How can we help? What can we do to reduce these uncertainties?
Gracias. Buenas tardes. Gracias a Olade por la invitación. Lo siento, pero hablaré en inglés. I studied Spanish at the university, but then I met and married a woman from France, so I speak French, not Spanish now. Allow me a quick introduction on the IEF again. The International Energy Forum was founded as a producer and consumer dialogue between energy producers and energy consumers. And as you can imagine, we're speaking at an energy panel, energy event, and we're speaking about mining and minerals. So the definition of what a producing country is and the definition of what a consuming country is going to change in the energy transition. And so we have now started doing work in energy, critical minerals for the energy transition. And so we had a similar approach and a similar question that Gaston talked about, which was, you see these forecasts for the deployment of renewable energy. You see solar panels, wind turbines, EVs. They're all made of metals and minerals. And so the question we had was, well, how much is the demand going to go up? And we looked at a number of surveys. We did a survey of the number of reports that are out there publicly available, some of which are from IRENA, IEA, and others. And so we surveyed 11 different of these publicly available reports. And there were 28 different minerals and metals mentioned across these 11 reports, but there was only enough data to compare 8 minerals. So aluminum, cobalt, copper, graphite, lithium, neodymium, nickel, and silver. And so what we found is across these 11 projections, the demand projections for each metal is very wide. So, for example, in aluminum, demand in 2040 was in comparison to current production, the projected demand in 2040 ranged from anywhere from 21% of what we produce today to 67%, and that's just the demand for energy transition for aluminum. So aluminum has, of course, many other uses. So we're talking about more than half, potentially more than half, to almost a quarter of all aluminum produced today going towards energy transition demand. And similar range for copper, which was anywhere from 23% to 102%. And so there's this huge range, so that's one massive uncertainty. And then because of those ranges, when you compare them to today's production levels, they're absolutely massive. So, for example, the median, so el número medio, so the middle number across these projections for aluminum in 2040 compared with the current largest producer. So I'm going to say a metal, I'm going to say a percentage, and it's this percentage or the multiple of that, the current largest producing country. So in 2040, the median projected aluminum demand is the equivalent of 80% of China's current aluminum production. We would need 2.4 Congos worth of production of cobalt. We would need 1.8 Chiles worth of copper. So 2 Chiles. We would need to find 2 Chiles by 2040. We would need 2.3 China's worth of graphite. We would need 1.3 Indonesia's worth of nickel, and we would need 2.3 Mexico's worth of silver, and the king of them all, lithium. We would need close to 13 Australia's worth of lithium production to get the median projected demand in 2040 across these projections. So you see these massive numbers, you see all this demand coming. So the next question we had was, where's the investment? Where's it going to come from? And so we talked to mining companies and we talked to the mining industry, and they said there's too much uncertainty. So there's not so much uncertainty in the mining aspect in terms of the below ground risk, the minerals being present. They know where the minerals are. They know the resource potential of many regions. What's a big problem is the above ground risk, the political environment, the tax regimes, the permitting problems, the social governance, the social acceptance of new mines. Because one thing that the mining industry is finding out is that lots of people want solar panels and wind turbines and clean energy and electric vehicles, but they don't want the mines. And that's where the clash is happening right now. And then on the technical side, one of the biggest uncertainties that the mining industry is really worried about is the changes across technology across time. So one of the big reasons for the divergence in these outlooks is they make assumptions on the material intensity. So material intensity is this much copper per 1 megawatt hour of capacity of wind, or this many kilograms of lithium per EV battery. Those kinds of intensity assumptions can either be fixed, and then they just take those assumptions forward in the outlook, or they can change over time, so we get more efficient. So we use less material per EV, we use less material per wind turbine. And so there's risk there.
Hay cierto riesgo, pero
The technical side is a changing in chemistry. One thing I don't think people appreciate enough is the fact that an EV battery there's multiple kinds of chemistries in EV batteries. And so an electric vehicle battery can change based on the material price. So we saw cobalt. Everyone saw pictures of artisanal mining with children going into mines and to mine cobalt in the Congo. So a lot of battery manufacturers avoided cobalt. So they changed the chemistry of their battery. So what happened if you had just invested in a new cobalt mine? Then you also have that across time. So the mining companies are looking at both above ground risks and permitting delays, construction delays, tax and policy risks, and they're also looking towards the future well, if we invest in a mine now, our mine is not going to start producing until 10, 15 years from now. So what is going to be the output? Is the demand still going to be there? And so I think if you put yourself in the shoes of a mining company executive, you have to make a multi-billion-dollar decision now on opening a new mine in a sometimes risky place of the world, and you have to hope that in 15, 20 years from now, the material you're producing is still going to be relevant. It's not going to get substituted, or the chemistry will just change and the market will go away. So that, in a hard nutshell, that's a bit of a reality check, I apologize, but that is why you see all these big demand numbers, but you don't see a corresponding level of investment to go with it. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mason. I think you paint a great picture of the size of the challenge, and it's a mining challenge at the heart of it. Y ahora quiero pasar a ti.
Ana, Milena, we now come to you. You seem to be at the forest right now, but you are usually found in the mines as our colleagues in Chile. But based on your experience on the ground in the mining sector, what are the challenges to undertake mining projects, large investments? What are the challenges in terms of planning and implementation for such large investments? Well, good morning in Colombia, good afternoon in Montevideo. Can you all hear me well? Yes, we can. Okay, first of all, I found I couldn't hear Gaston's presentation or the first part of his presentation for technical issues. So I'm sorry if I am repeating any of what he said in his first intervention. But listening to Mason, well, it's concerning, right? We are concerned about the current situation. All studies from those carried out by OLAVE, the International Energy Agency, World Bank, they all come to the same conclusion. To be able to meet the current demand of critical minerals, increasing demand of critical minerals, and meet the goals that all countries have set in terms of energy transition and decarbonization, we need to have more mines, we need to produce more. And entire regions like Latin America, we're so rich in terms of pools, reservoirs, minerals like copper and lithium in particular. This is a huge development of economic and social opportunity. At the same time, is how do we do it in a sustainable manner? Based on our past experiences, learnings, how can we really make out of this a good opportunity? One of the main challenges for us is to how can we adapt our strategies and mining policies in such a way, as Mason has said, we're able to attract investment to produce those minerals that we need. And two topics come to mind that I think I would focus on two of the aspects that Mason addressed, and which are the biggest concern for me based on what I see in the sector. And I'm using Colombia as an example, of course, but I think it's the same case for many other countries in Latin America. So what are the two main challenges? For me, these are the two big obstacles to be able to respond to that growing mineral demand. Well, the first is public policy about incentives to mining exploration. The really supply of strategic minerals, as we know, is limited, and to increase production, something that you cannot do overnight, is a mining project. From the time that we start screening until the time that we actually have a mine, 17 years easily could go by. So it's not something that we can do overnight to increase production, So what we need is to make sure we have a stable regulatory framework in place that will attract the much needed investment for those mining projects. I'm focusing on exploration. Why? Well, because that's where all of the projects start. And we, in Colombia at least, we should no longer speak about our mining potential, but rather make it a certainty, a reality. And there are no clear messages from our government. We don't see strong political decisions to promote and incentivize this activity. This activity, as we all know, is quite risky. Out of 1,000 screening projects, one turns into a mine. So it's really critical to address public resources. So the government has very little technical capacity, so they cannot really undertake that activity. The capital market is specialized, and we need to attract them. We need to bring them here to our region, and to do so, we need legal stability, political stability. We need the industry to buy in and to the industry to join. And let me use a few examples from Colombia. We speak about transition, about the need to increase our exploration in the country, but we don't see clear decisions. Quite the opposite, I would say. There's little consistency in the government. There are two recent examples of this political instability. One of them are the emergency decrees of the Guajira region. Thank God the court has ruled that they are unconstitutional. They will be in place for another year, but they were restricting operations. This is a carbon mine, quite big, really, in the region of Guajira, and this was restricting the operation of the mine for the next few years, and that's quite worrisome, quite concerning for any investor in the mining sector. Right now, our country is discussing a decree to declare the temporary reserve areas. So if you look at the decree, I mean, it seems great. We all want to preserve certain areas, and it sounds really nice, and it is part of the decarbonization of economy, and it seems to be very positive for our Paris Agreement commitments and decarbonization targets. But if you look at the fine print, there were a number of measures that were restricting mining activities in the country. So this is one of the biggest concerns. Governments needed to streamline and to speed up administrative processes, planning, permits. In Colombia, until you get a permit and authorization for mining, we need more companies that want to come to the country to continue exploring. And another challenge that we have in place, and I believe is quite important considering our context, and Mason mentioned it as well, is the social competitiveness and the position with regards to mining projects that are becoming more popular in our region. IRENA has identified 6 risks when it comes to critical material supply. One of them is political instability and social unrest. And there are several studies that have been conducted recently. MINSUS, for example, in one of their latest documents, they stated that the Latin American region is the region where there's more social unrest associated to mining. In 2022, there were 324 conflicts. And that will be one of the biggest limitations. The lack of social acceptance, I think, is one of the biggest hurdles for mining projects. So these are the causes, dear speakers, I think are, well, some of the, growing expectations from the community. And as expectations grow, as the community's expectations grow, and the impact of these projects, and this is not just about mining projects, and this is something quite surprising. In Colombia, we just recently witnessed a case where, in Colombia, due to the very high levels and the expectations of the community, we had to suspend a project to build a wind park, the Impeshi wind power park, with a 205 megawatt install capacity, and we had to suspend that project because of very great delays to the plan and community expectations. Although there had been dialogues, communication, and conversations about and the desire of the company to reach agreements with the community, that was impossible. There were different conflicts, different problems, and there had been more investment. And the delays in the plan, in the schedule, well, finally the company decided to suspend the project. So the environmental impacts, the impacts to health, in the community, and communities in general have a strong reaction to mining and mining projects, the effect on biodiversity and the environment. And another issue that I feel might be or could be managed and handled is engagement and consultation. The lack of community engagement at early stages is one of the main sources of, I would say, mistrust in the community that end up reflecting conflict and interruptions to the different projects.
For all these risks, the investors and the end users of these minerals will probably require that our supply chains are responsible chains, that they adhere to ESG criteria. And this is just something I wanted to just talk about the issue, so that the next time that I have something to say, we can delve into the potential solutions and how we can tackle those issues. But just to wrap up, I'd like to say that if companies don't move forward towards the implementation of very high standards and good practices, it's going to be very difficult for us to make any progress towards being able to actually meet the demand for critical minerals. Anna, you're just giving us a scenario of, I would call it conditional opportunity. There is an investment interest, but the different parties of the mesh need to work. The industry needs to be responsible. The states need to give a legal certainty to manage the administrative processes and consultation processes properly. And from the civil society, we need an active role so that they can enforce their rights within the framework of these large projects. So now, maybe Raphael, now, I'm going to ask you an easy question. You have studied in great depth different governance models and value-adding policies, especially around lithium, but also about other minerals in the region. So what factors do you think are necessary to be able to interpret when it comes to the positions of the countries regarding the development of critical materials and the different ways of approaching these enabling conditions that Ana Milena was telling us about? Thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Olade, and all the organizers of this event and this debate for the invitation. Listen, I'd say that I'm going to talk about the public policy side of things. That's going to be my approach after having heard this introduction of macro data and this landing on the reality of mining project, as Ana Milena was sharing with us. I think that in the region, and I think it's also important to refer in particular to lithium, which is the mineral with the highest demand or interest in the region, and copper as well, which is another mineral that is very produced in the region, where there are countries in Latin America that are at the forefront on a global scale. And in terms of governance, I think that, well, there are different governance models for lithium. Even within one country, just like Chile, you have different governance models for lithium and copper. There is a way in which lithium is governed, and the regulations and the regulatory framework for copper is different. I'd also say that this governance of each country is delimited by the international context and by a local context. This local context, which is about how the country is doing, what is their level of development, how strong are their institutions, what is the mining culture in that country, what is the energy history in the country. Talking about what Ana Milena said, what about this social unrest around mining projects or energy projects, I think that beyond this lack of trust that there is, well, that may be due to that historical debt that we have in our country towards our populations, to our local communities, and this huge inequality. It is no coincidence that Latin America is the region with the highest number of conflicts, given that it's the country, the continent that has more inequality. So these are structural issues in our countries, and within that context is where mining governance comes into play. And of course, each country has different stakeholders. There are countries like Chile, where you have very strong institutions with a very consolidated mining industry for the copper extraction. It's the main copper producer in the world, and it's been so for several years. There are countries, as Ana Milena said, like in Colombia, they're beginning to generate a mining industry, or the early stages of the copper industry in Argentina, but now becoming more and more interesting for lithium production. So these different governance models are the ones that set the tone for how things are being done. An attribute that you can find in lithium, and here I wanted to comment on what Gaston said earlier, is that all the countries in the region are already referring to lithium as a strategic resource as part of their constitutional regulatory system. And for example, in Chile, since 1979, lithium has been a strategic resource, excluded back then because of safety reasons. In Mexico, more recently, it was recently declared as a public utility because it was a strategic resource. In Bolivia, in the 70s, they included lithium as a strategic resource as well. And Argentina, in the provinces of La Rioja, Jujuy, it is also regulated as a strategic resource. So I would say that lithium in the region is usually categorized as a strategic resource, which gives it some institutionality within the regulatory framework and a different narrative from public policies. I would also say that there are different models. For instance, there are more state-owned models, models like Bolivia, now Mexico, that is, the state is becoming preponderant, or is beginning to create a lithium company that will be a state-owned company, so lithium exploitation will be something managed by the state. There are other projects that have been more managed by the market as a whole, such as the case of Argentina. And of course, without disregarding things like innovation and research, Argentina have done great efforts in this sense. And then we have Chile, which is a country that has been traditionally categorized as a free market, open to investments in general, but that has also many state-owned companies in the mining sector. You have Codelco, which is the state-owned, the main state-owned copper company, actually the biggest in the world. And for their national lithium policies, now they have the proposal to create a national lithium company as well. Not long ago, they acquired, they started lithium exploration in the north for $800 million. So you see that lithium is becoming a player in the mining industry, and these are the different ways in which the countries of our region have approached lithium as a mineral. Another issue is that all countries, one way or another, have developed this notion of Mariana Mazzucata, which is the entrepreneurial country. Regardless of the models and ideologies, they all have a national lithium company, or they want their national mining industry to have some participation in lithium. That's the case of Mexico. Also in Argentina, you have a YPF Lithium, which is developing lithium. You have Codelco in Chile, also a national company in Mexico. Also national lithium reservoirs in Bolivia. So you see that the states are very active in the capacity building process for the mining industry. The starting points are different, and as was said a few minutes ago, we're all starting at different places with different realities. And that means that the way in which the lithium industry is developing varies greatly. And I hope that we will have the time to talk about the fact that lithium, well, another cross-cutting factor to all countries is that lithium has promoted, has driven the development of industrial or productive development policies. So again, with different nuances and intensities and strategies, but all countries, well, in the region we have always talked about this, about trying to add value to our production system based on natural resources. In some cases we have been unsuccessful. But with lithium, I think that this is being rekindled. And so there are production policies that have different shapes, that follow different strategies, that use different tools. And well, not to overextend, perhaps we can just discuss this later, because I think it's a key factor. And then one last thing, just to give you some numbers. I was impressed by all the figures that he shared, and I want to share some of my own. Another issue with lithium and copper in the region is how to draw investments, right? You need investments. This is about the amount of minerals that you need for the energy transition, but that is also one of the challenges that all our countries are facing. And this is where this investment race begins, and we need to keep that in check so that it does not hinder other sectors. So it's not just investment in anything, it's investment that needs to add value, that needs to generate quality jobs, that needs to create a supply chain, that need to involve technical capacities, capacity building for the local communities. And just to give an idea, if Chile wants to keep its market share for copper for the next 10 years, they will need approximately $36 billion worth of investments in projects so that they can keep producing at the level that will be required. And Peru, which is the second copper producer, well, depending on the different scenarios, ECLAC have calculated that it's going to be anywhere between 10 and $18 billion worth of investment, so that we can keep on producing at the same pace. And then Argentina also, they have mentioned a score of projects in lithium with investments worth more of $10 billion. So you see that these investments are huge if you want to keep lithium productions at the level at which these countries have done so, being at the forefront as they have. Thank you, Rafael. There are no silver bullets, clearly. Each country is targeting the challenges of the mining production industry from different philosophies, and we see a number of strategies, but I think that at the end of the day it all boils down to some common goals, and I believe that this is something that I would like to discuss with Ricardo. There is the challenge of drawing investments that are responsible, trying to add shared value around the project so that we can have good impact management in the areas of influence that will make these investments and these projects, when they come to be, when they are feasible, from a practical standpoint, well, they will pose this challenge. On the one hand, for the market to mobilize assets for these projects, and then governance to coordinate all the different stakeholders. And that what that is telling us is that we have a very challenging scenario. If we need 500 additional mines to meet the challenges for our climate policies, then of course we need to give this agenda a sense of urgency and relevance. And this is not just about producing countries, and this is about what you said, Ricardo, right? We have seen several initiatives and efforts on a global scale proliferating, trying to ensure the supply of these critical materials. So how do you think that we can foster a shared view, a coordination scheme that can be more efficient between the different parties on a global note so that we can achieve these common goals? So that's the issue, right? When you talked about the relevance of development underlying all the investments of the projects. As we said, we're talking about geopolitics and we're talking about regional development. So what we're interested in ultimately is having equity. And then the projects, as the society perceives them, should have their endorsement. And this is a process. And the big risk here is that we could be missing a chance to give traction to this energy transition, or in this case, that we would miss the opportunity to develop the region, leveraging this need for critical minerals, which would be so important for our societies, especially here in Latin America. I think that would be very interesting to move to that new green global architecture, and that is something that of course concerns these projects, but even more so, it's about the chains that remain, the supply chains that remain, and this is much of what conditions the whole scenario, right? What kind of public policies are needed? So can we prepare our economies so that we can move on to this new process in a competitive way that will not be a value distribution, but adding value rather to the supply chain? And that is where I was saying that the game is played on the field, and I think that we should keep that in mind. And of course, all the institutions represented here and all the policymakers should be aware of that process. And I think that within that context is where we need to talk about coordination management. What I would say, a strategic vision, as was mentioned in the ministerial panel. We need a strategic view for the region.
So to attract those elements, share experiences, and, well, we have many cases, success cases in different markets for different minerals, and we could share those experiences in different form, not only at the policymaker level, but rather to develop a regional strategy, really to set our position in the markets and maybe carry out joint negotiations or a more comprehensive share process, rather than being competitive against, well, projects in the region or countries in the region. That would be something that is closely connected to, well, just transition. When we speak about just transition, how do we address this topic in the regional agenda? How do we consider the benefits and make sure that those benefits are present? I don't see any other way, but rather having more coordination throughout the process. What are the important factors? Which are the critical factors? We spoke about the need to invest more regulatory frameworks, to have more policies in place, and the risks that we can find in projects. So how can we speed up these processes based on the experiences and lessons to learn, and maybe have a leapfrog in this process? These are the shortcuts, I think is the word, the shortcuts that we need. I mean, it's been 17 years, right? It's about time. If we wait 17 more years until 2030, well, I don't think we'll ever get to 1.5. 17 years, and that really struck me, that figure. If demand has to wait 17 more years for that project to be a reality, well, we need to find another alternative, right? It's not working. And yeah, let me just mention one last thing. What I'm proposing, of course, some other regions are already implementing it. the European Union. Critical Raw Material Act, new Net Zero Industry Act, Green Deal Industry Plan, 55 REPL-EU. So let's look at other markets. This is already happening. They are already coordinating. And now if we want to compete, if we want to be there, we need to play that field, that game on the ground, on the field. Let's use our good players. Let's use our best players. I agree with the IDB. We know there is a need to build a shared vision, and there might be different strategies to reach that shared goal, as Rafael said. Maybe the first step is about building a shared diagnosis or understanding, cross-cutting understanding about the nature of the challenge. We've all produced our own reports. We quote one another, and I think that's what we should do. Now, Mason.
The challenge of a common diagnosis. There are several factors we haven't mentioned here. We haven't mentioned recycling, demand side changes, pricing issues. How do we get to this common or shared understanding? What else do we need to take into account?
So that's a very good point. So one of the things for recycling that's another element of uncertainty. And I think there could be a lot of coordination on recycling at a global scale and a regional scale, because recycling in the outlooks, when you start taking electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, and you recycle the materials that are already in there, you don't need another mine. You don't need new material. You're reusing older material. And so that helps with shrink that demand side problem. And so we saw that in the outlooks, the critical sort of point in when that starts taking place is between 2030 and 2040. And so that's when recycling starts to change the game. But recycling can be helped by common standards on how you make a battery. The simple understanding of if you're Toyota, if you're Peugeot, if you're General Motors, if you're any of the vehicle manufacturers, if you standardize where you put the screws in your batteries, you can save a lot on labor taking apart a battery and recycling it. Another problem that's going to need common standards and coordination is going to be with the logistics and safety issues of recycling these things. If you look at the history of recycling as an industry in general, we humans have a so-so record on it, because what happens is you take recycling from one place that has probably a more wealthy country, and it ends up being recycled in a less wealthy country, and then sent back. So we need to make sure that there is no sort of like EV battery dumping grounds in the world, that a lot of these countries realize that the materials in these EVs are not only critical and strategic, they should be treated as kind of like a strategic reserve. You know, we think of strategic reserves in oil right now, but you can think of your strategic reserve of lithium, of copper, of rare earth metals as being on 4 wheels sitting in your driveway. And then the standards of logistics for recycling is very tricky, because once an electric vehicle battery is dead, it becomes a very, very heavy, somewhat dangerous piece of equipment. And you have to figure out, how do I take this dead car, how do I get the battery out of it, and then how do I take something that weighs maybe several kilotons sometimes. Some of those batteries are very heavy, and then transport that to where it's going to be recycled safely. Because again, that battery can still have dangerous chemicals or dangerous battery charge in there, and you can have a short. We've seen many fires of lithium-ion batteries in transport, and so that's one of them. So then the other is pricing. I don't think that pricing has often come into this. discussion, because right now we see high volatility in the prices of these materials. We've seen lithium go high, then lithium's currently coming down. We saw cobalt go very high. Cobalt's coming down. And you see these fluctuations in the price that are almost unsustainable if you're making investment decisions anywhere, whether you're making a miner or whether you're a refiner. And so there could be there needs to be a lot more infrastructure built on a common ground in the market to build pricing infrastructure. You can look on your phones right now and find out what the price of crude oil is. You can look on your phones and find out what the price of natural gas is, more or less, in the global market. But good luck finding cobalt, good luck finding titanium, good luck finding all these other materials that we've been mentioned here. It's a very opaque and non-transparent market. So there needs to be more transparency. And so I think transparency standards could be the first step in regional integration of reporting, okay, we signed a contract to extract this mineral, and here's the deal. This is the details of what we have. And so working together on transparency and rather than secrecy is, I think, a good point. And I believe there was a third one in there, I forgot.
I forgot two, but no, I said demand side changes. So
demand side
how
changes.
we're gonna, yeah.
So the scale of the problem, we're talking about these very big numbers, very scary big demand side numbers, but we can make a difference in that. We can actually shrink the size of that problem with changes in consumer behavior. Now, despite being an American, I do like to insult my own country sometimes, because in the United States, you see electric vehicles coming to the market, but they're just really big versions of the same big trucks and Hummers and things like that everybody likes to drive. They don't need to be like that. So here in Uruguay, I noticed that a lot of the cars are very small, modest, simple. That's what the EVs need to be. If you have everyone in the world desiring to drive an electric Hummer, which has enough material in it to make, like, I think 4 Toyota Priuses, then we're going to have a big mining problem. But if we convince people that the idea of an electric vehicle is not some big, massive tank, it's something more along the lines of what you see here in Uruguay. Either you hybridize it and you use smaller batteries, or you electrify smaller cars and you have more people and more batteries for each ton of material that you have to extract. So there's a lot of coordination on standards for pricing and transparency, and standards for recycling, so regional recycling efforts, and also on standards for vehicle and consumer patterns. If I could give the region some advice, don't follow the United States' model of selling really big, hefty cars and building lots of highways, because you just end up making the problem worse and not better.
Thank you, Mason. Creo que mencionas dos aspectos fundamentales. Por un lado,
You just mentioned two critical aspects. On the one hand, we can tackle some uncertainties through policy tools and elements, and that might be the subject of collaboration. We're speaking about challenges, about what we don't know, and well, we've been working on mining in the mining sector for Latin America and the Caribbean for many years. Ana Milena, I mean, you have the floor, and I know we are running out of time, but Ana Milena, what have we learned? What do we need to do to inform this conversation based on the lessons learned in the mining sector in the past few decades? What can we do? How can we do this leapfrogging, as we just mentioned before? How can we reduce this roadmap so we can get to our objectives more quickly? Okay, so let me see how to answer this, how to give you a very quick answer. There are many elements that we could consider, but let me just go back to what I said in my other intervention as one of the biggest challenges for the energy transition, and that is how we engage with the community. Mining companies today are very different from what they used to be 20 years ago. I don't know if it's because of technology, innovation, communication, and the demands from our stakeholders, investments, communities, consumers are really demanding much more from us. Mining companies from very early stages, even scoping companies in their first or second year, they are implementing CSD criteria. They are having significant changes in how they operate in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, this is a positive change. I think we've made a lot of progress in this regard. Whatever the reasons, mining companies are implementing more and better environmental and social practices. Now,
if companies don't do this, well, they have learned that implementing ESG criteria, being more sustainable, having social and corporate responsible policies will allow them to build trust amongst the different groups of interest. And not only that, but to build on the reputation, which is such an important thing for a mining company, to reduce social unrest and improve the relationships between the different stakeholders in the region. If you ask me, what do we need to do thinking of these relationships with the community, I think that, and what I'm going to say is, because I have some very interesting examples of effective relations with the communities at a very early age. We have some very good examples. I would say that this is perhaps one of the most important things. How can we guarantee that in our relations with the local communities we can be effective doing it at an early stage, transparently? You were talking about transparency, and I just couldn't agree more with that. We need to be more inclusive. We need to get them involved. And considering that we have so much diversity in communities, we have indigenous communities, African descendants, diverse communities from every perspective, and each country has its own quirks in terms of the culture. Well, I think we should have this multicultural approach, a gender approach, a diversity, equality and inclusion approach when it comes to that relation with the community. So for that to be effective and for that to be efficient with the communities, we need to open communication channels that are open, transparent and permanent, and that will allow us to know from the beginning what are those main concerns that a certain community, a certain local community has, so that we can build a shared vision of the future with them, and we can build, based on that, different solutions and to better manage environmental and social impact. I think that in my personal experience, we've had we have had different multi-stakeholder dialogue scenarios with the different actors of the territory involved, where again, from an early stage we managed to understand and build that shared vision for a territory where mining is not the only activity, but mining is an additional stakeholder or actor as part of the economic development of that region or territory. And I've had at least 2 experiences in the sense that I believe have been very effective in guaranteeing the decrease of social unrest while managing social and environmental risks. Another issue and another trait, another feature of that effective relation with the community needs to be that we truly have them involved, effectively involved. That there is an egalitarian representation, that all the communities are part of it and that their voices and their concerns are heard. What many times happens with mining companies is that we socialize, and I hate that term, socializing. We are not supposed to socialize. We need to have open dialogue, and an effective dialogue implies a two-way communication, not socializing, and by that I mean I'm just letting them know what I'm planning to do. Leaving this issue aside for a minute, we need to talk about transparency. Being transparent, well, I think that increasingly companies are less afraid of being transparent about what they do, the good stuff, the bad stuff. We need to tell the people about the impact, of course, of what we do. We need to talk about the benefits, and we need to do so in such a way that communities need to know from the company what are the big challenges of their operations, and that allows us to build together possible solutions. What I'm seeing now is that companies are publishing sustainability reports at an earlier stage. I've seen exploration companies that in the very first or second year they're telling everyone about how their operations are being run, and I think that that is one of the healthiest practices in terms of sustainability. What else can I say? Well, the responsible management of environmental and social impact, adopting practices with innovation and technology. Well, there are two things that in Latin America regarding environmental impact management, there are two things that are very relevant, and I think it's even important for this discussion we're having today, and that is water. Yeah, but we have two things: the water footprint and the carbon footprint. In terms of environmental management, I think that these are the two key points that we need to address when we need to apply innovation. Well, in the case of water, in our communities, regardless of whether we are in Colombia or in Argentina or Chile, the main concern that local communities have is water management. Whether because it will lead to pollution, or maybe you're talking about dry areas, and it's a very difficult thing to have access to water as a resource. And in that lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, where you have 65% of world reserves, this is a very dry land where having access to water is a challenge, and it's important that companies that will develop their mining projects within that triangle have as a top priority water management and trying to save water as much as they can, also when it comes to reusing and managing water, that should be a top priority. The other issue that I just can't help to mention is the carbon footprint. Even though the mining industry is not one of the main contributors to global warming gas emissions, the industry accounts for, in its processing, accounts for 10% of global CO2 emissions, and we need to see this as an opportunity to become leaders that are worrying about SDG number 7, that are taking climate action plans to reduce our carbon footprint. I think that is a golden opportunity for local communities. This is not something that they are concerned about. As I said, the everyday issues are what concern them the most, their immediate needs being met, whether or not they will have access to fresh water, and they're not really worried about the 2030 agenda or the Paris Agreement and the NDCs and whatnot. But as responsible, self-regulated mining companies, I think, companies are doing it already, increasingly. They are participating in this kind of initiatives more and more often, and I think that this has to be an opportunity for us to be at the forefront of minimizing CO2 emissions so that we can contribute to decarbonization. Thank you, Ana Milena. I'm sorry, I need to ask you to stop there. I'm getting some ugly faces from the organizers. Gaston, you wanted to say something? Yes, I think that it oftentimes happens that we take a look at the points where we need to improve, but I think this is a good example, and this week also represents that time of looking back and seeing what results we have obtained so far. If we recap on some of the main topics that have been mentioned so far, there is a good coordination between understanding the situation of different organizations, which is something that I would like to highlight, even though Mason was telling us that there is uncertainty. Well, at the very least, the fact that organizations that are very focused on energy aspects and renewable energies, that they are already having a strong foot in the mining industry, that's a key aspect. Also, we were talking about coordination. The fact that yesterday we managed to have 10 countries sign a declaration for hydrogen certification matters, I think that really shows that the region is moving forward in how we coordinate. That only last year, ministerial decisions of the 27 ministers of energy said that they agreed in making progress in the mining industry also shows that coordination. Of course, we always see the glass half empty and what we still have to do, but okay, let's see what we are doing so far, and seeing those principles of mutual understanding that will allow us to have a Northern Star as a country, as an industry and as a sector, and that we have this common ground between the issue, the steps to follow, and as Ana Milena was saying, on what the civil society is genuinely concerned about, and there are no grey shades in this sense. I think that we all know what they are really concerned about. Well, that's a solid point, and I think that it's something that once it's now that it's made it to our agenda, I think it's never going to leave, and nothing's going to stop us from promoting it even further in the future. Thank you, Gaston. Rafael, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna have enough time to give you the microphone for your final words. Thank you so much for being here with us as a panel. I think that I've learned a lot, and we're talking about a joint agenda for the future in terms of the institutions that we represent and where we work, and I think it's a great thing that we can do this because it is pressing and it's relevant. Thank you very much.